1772, more than 250 years ago, Joseph Pilmore, one of the missionaries of John Wesley, came to Baltimore to organize the Baltimore Methodists into a society. They met at first in the basement of the old Dutch church, now Old Otterbein, while they raised money to build their own meeting house. They found property on a little street called Lovely Lane, and they raised the money, they built a meeting house. Francis Asbury laid the cornerstone in 1783. That meeting house in 1784 became the host for the Christmas conference, the founding conference of what is now the United Methodist denomination, which was then known as the Methodist Episcopal Church. Over the course of 10 days, they approved their own book of discipline, orders of worship, they ordained ministers, and Francis Asbury was ordained as the first superintendent, what we now call bishop, of the new American church. We have his ordination certificate here in the museum. He came into that conference as a layperson, and on the first day he was ordained as a deacon, on the second day as an elder, and on the third day as superintendent or bishop. So it's the only person we know of to go in 3 days from layperson to bishop in Methodist history. The new modern Lovely Lane building is the centennial monument of the events that occurred at the original Lovely Lane Meeting House, built 100 years after the fact to honor that Christmas conference. Whenever we welcome visitors to Lovely Lane, I always begin by saying, welcome home. Because to the congregation that worships here, this isn't our church. This is a church that belongs to the denomination. And you, the visitor, are the people this church is here for. It's your home, it's your mother church. This congregation has made a decision to remain in this community, in the city of Baltimore, even through some challenging times, times when the congregation has dwindled. We are a reconciling congregation because we don't want to be a congregation worshiping in a museum. We want to be a congregation that uses this building the way it was originally intended, to bring people together, to bring people to Christ, and to remind people of what is possible under God. Sometimes people talk about a place and say, if these walls could talk. And at Lovely Lane, the walls do talk. From the outside of the building, which is built to resemble one of the 4th and 3rd century basilicas from Italy, from which the Christian movement began, to remind the American Methodists of our common roots as Christians, to the interior of this sanctuary, where the walls are lined with the plaques that tell the history of our denomination, and the stained glass windows, which don't have the pictures of the scenes of Christ and the scenes from the Bible, but the names of our pastors, from the very first pastors, Robert Strawbridge and Francis Asbury, all the way around to our current pastor. This building was built to tell a story. As the centennial monument of American Methodism, it wasn't just a display. It wasn't just a reminder that we've been here 100 years, but was meant to tell the story of who we are as Methodists and how we came to this place. While the outside is an historic reminder of our ancient past, the interior was actually built as a modern interpretation of church, as a Methodist meeting house. There's no deep altar area. There's no altar at all. We have a communion table. We don't have pews. We have seats. We are built in a meeting house style because as Methodists, we are focused on the people in the world, in the neighborhood, and in the community to which we are given ministry. We count on the fact that Christ has taken care of salvation and the life after, and that we as Methodists are directed to be a part of this world and this time and in ministry in this community. Lovely Lane began at the Lovely Lane Meeting House, but we soon grew too big for that space, and we moved to a site a few blocks away on Light Street. That burned down, unfortunately, after a funeral ceremony. The candles lit the church on fire, and the church was rebuilt across the street. And the city decided to widen the street, and that church was condemned to be torn down, and Lovely Lane moved to a new home on Charles Street to one of our daughter congregations, a church that eventually would become Mount Vernon Place United Methodist Church. But about that time, we were approaching the centennial of Methodism. And the Council of Bishops had asked the congregation to think of a way to memorialize the 100th anniversary of the founding of the denomination. The church called on a young pastor, John Goucher, who had just built Strawbridge Church nearby because he had a reputation for being able to get building projects done. And he conceived of a monumental building to tell a very personal story. It was a controversial building because some thought it was too big, too expensive, too far outside of the city. But with a lot of cooperation and a lot of meetings, they got the work done. For an architect, they hired Stanford White, a young architect out of a new firm in New York, McKim, Mead & White, who would go on to become one of the most famous architects in America. Together with Goucher, they looked back to that history of early basilicas and early churches and to the history of Methodism in America. See, Goucher wanted not just to build a building, but for it to serve a function. He knew that at the time the Methodists were divided into different fractions, the Methodist Episcopal, the Methodist Episcopal South, the Methodist Protestant Church, and he saw this building as a way to remind people of our past and to bring them together. So he used these icons, which you see on the plaques around the walls, Robert Strawbridge, Francis Asbury, our first itinerant preachers, our first local preachers, to remind people of who we are as Methodists. He built this interior as a meeting house to remind people that we are meant to be working together. And so this building came together not just as a reminder that we've been here, but as a reminder of who we are. The sanctuary as you see it today is largely as it would have looked back in 1884 when it was started with construction, back in 1887 when the cornerstone was laid. The seats are the original seats, though they've been refinished. The walls and the colors have been returned to their original appearance. From the floor to the dome, 65 feet. Our dome is a signature piece. It represents the night sky on November 6th, 1887, the day the building was dedicated. I always talk of Lovely Lane as two churches. In one way, we are the nationally recognized mother church, a destination church, but we are still a community church and looking for ways that we can be in ministry in this community. Aside from sponsoring, being one of the founding congregations of Manna House, a food ministry, we open our doors to a lot of community activities, from the lab school next door, to dance groups, to community meetings, and many ways that the building is used. In fact, we are redeveloping our chapel space as a neighborhood arts and community center so that we can, as the building was originally intended, be the center of the community, a place where people gather, a place where people find a home for arts presentations, for community meetings, for education, for worship, and for all the different uses that a community might need a center, an identity, a way to come together. In fact, this community is known as Old Goucher, after Dr. Goucher, the minister who helped us build this Centennial Monument building. We hope that we can say welcome home to you soon. We invite you to come for worship. We invite you to come for a tour. We have a tour after every worship service, every Sunday. We have tours throughout the week. We worship online. All the ways that you come be a part of the Lovely Lane experience, be a part of our family and community. We hope that you will join us.